In the year 1869, a young and ambitious Irish immigrant to Canada named Timothy Eaton opened a small dry goods store on Yonge Street in Toronto. Almost 4,000 kilometers west lay the vast open spaces of the Canadian prairies, where a rapidly growing population of new settlers from countries far and wide were beginning to make their mark on the land. The two would soon share a common history. By the turn of the century, Eaton had established an enormously successful department store, in large part fed by growing returns from its mail-order catalog business. In the West, you could now order a complete house, everything from floor to ceiling to shingles, from the company that kept good on its promise that every article will be found just what it is guaranteed to be. These catalog houses would soon dot the prairie landscape in all directions and serve many generations of families in homes large and small. Les Henry, who taught soil science and agriculture for over 30 years at the University of Saskatchewan, has a personal connection to the concept of catalog homes. His grandfather, Jerome Henry, moved to Milden, Saskatchewan in 1906 to farm. The farm prospered, and in 1917, a new home was built on the farm site, with a carload of lumber coming by rail from a BC mill to the Milden station and then hauled 3 miles to the farm by team and wagon, just like hundreds of catalog homes that could be ordered from a number of plan books. Les wrote a book on the subject entitled Catalogue Homes, Eatons and Others, and recounts how this major housing boom on the prairies started in the early part of the 20th century.
This particular phenomenon happened in the teens and 20s, and the teens were the big years, and 1917 was the biggest of all. If I go through my book, you'll find all sorts that were built in 1917. And you see, the land was settled just after the turn of the century. My grandfather came from Manitoba to Milden in 1906, and he didn't live in a sod shack because they came with resources from Manitoba and some lumber from there, so they lived in a smallish little bungalow house. And so people were in anything from sod houses to little shacks, and by 1917 there was serious money. The price of wheat in 1917 was $28 a bushel in 2006 dollars, so there was all kinds of money. So for grandfather to cut a check for $5,000, and that included all the building and everything for that house, wasn't much. That would be $75,000 in today's money. But you know, if wheat were $28 a bushel, no farmer would have trouble cutting a check for $75,000 to build a new house. So they were all built in the teens and 20s, and it tapered off very quickly in the 20s. The thing I didn't realize till recently, we always knew the Depression was in the 30s, but there was a fairly significant depression in the early 20s also. So it tapered off very, very quickly. And old Timothy was, or his offspring, were T. Eaton Company, were in there right away. They could see the potential. There was all these people and all this money in Western Canada, and there's no trees on the prairies. They're mostly on the prairies. So how are we going to get them houses? So that's how it came about, and the houses got shipped by rail, and the money was there to do it, and that's when it happened. And in their catalogs, they were very big from 1915 to about 1919, 1920, and after that they tapered off. The 1927 one only showed 3 houses, and by 1932 there was 3 or 4 houses in the catalog, and that was the end of it. So it was basically a phenomenon of the teens because of the huge prosperity of Western Canada farms in that particular period of time. There's oftentimes confusion, and you know, this isn't some kind of legal situation or a big business thing. It's a sentimental thing. So I always say, in the lack of any proof, if Great Aunt Mary Jane said it's an Eaton's house, then it's an Eaton's house. So that's kind of the way I go. And I don't, because I can't find it in any plan book or catalog, I don't necessarily say that it's not an Eaton's house, because it could be. They could have had their own plan. So there's all sorts of variations on the theme. There's one very good example at Waseca, and it's in chapter 7 of my book, Special Places. It's a huge mansion of a place, and it was built in 1918, and the second generation lady is living in it now. And she has the original blueprints in a safety deposit box in the bank and has a copy that she rolls out for people like me that come to visit. So there's no doubt about its pedigree, but it was never in any plan book. But I have since, or Eaton's plan book at least, and she didn't have any plan book around, I've since found it in Radford plan book, which is an architectural company from Illinois, and the exact house is there. So whether Timothy was borrowing or that family had lineages in the States, so maybe they got the page from the States and sent it to Eaton's, and they made the blueprint. But it was Eaton's, but it was never in any Eaton's catalog or plan book. And in fact, they called it plan number 766. When she first wrote me, she said it's plan 766, and I thought, this can't be. They didn't have any numbers. Their biggest number was 600, you see. So they made up a special plan number for this house, 766. So it's one of a kind. So there's all kinds of variations on the theme. Eaton's name is what's associated with Catalogue Houses, and it's kind of like Kleenex is to facial tissue, Eaton's is the generic name, but what people don't realize is that there were many actors in the plan book business. Eaton's is the best well known in Western Canada for sure, but Aladdin was probably a bigger one. Aladdin was started by two brothers in Bay City, Michigan in the States. They actually started off making kit boats, and then boat houses, and then houses. And none of these were, they're kits in that they were sent all the materials, and Aladdin were pre-cut, but people often call them prefab houses, but with one exception, they were not prefabricated. Eaton's wasn't even pre-cut, but Aladdin was pre-cut. So there was Eaton's, Aladdin, United Grain Growers got in the business. So we talked previously about the lumber wars, but United Grain Growers had their own mill at Hutton, British Columbia. In fact, I've since been dealing with a person from British Columbia that knows where Hutton is. The trains still pass through it, although there's nothing left of Hutton, but there's still a spot there with a sign that says Hutton, east of Prince George in British Columbia. So United Grain Growers was big. BC Mills Timber and Trading were the only company that made true prefab houses, and there's one of them right here in Saskatoon. I have one in my book from Vonda. They dealt mostly with banks, so the bank resident houses in small towns were often BC Mills Timber and Trading, particularly the Bank of Commerce. And a number of the banks were the bank in Humboldt and one in Weyburn, for example, were prefab houses from BC Mills Timber and Trading. They started in business in about 1908, but they were out of business very quickly in 1914. They were on False Creek, and even in those days the real estate in False Creek was worth so much that it paid them more to retire than carry on with the prefab house business. So they're only ones prefab. Other people that were in it in terms of putting plans together, and I worked there for 32 years and never knew it, was the University of Saskatchewan and the University of Manitoba. They both had plan books that they put out for people to use to build houses and barns, and the book sits in the university bookstore in the university library to this day about the plans. There were 6 house plans and a number of different barn plans, and it was done in cahoots with the BC Forest Service, so they were tied in some way with the BC Forest Service. I have yet to find any house that was built from the plans of the University of Saskatchewan. The plans were actually made in part by Professor Gregg from agricultural engineering was involved, and some of the people from home economics faculty were involved as well. But the University of Manitoba plan books, there is one in their literature. They did have one house that was of their particular design, and I have it in the book. So there were some of those around, but it was quite interesting that they were in the business at that time too. So there was a wide variety of companies that were in. You know, there was a lot of houses to be built, and there was a lot of money. So everybody was jumping on the bandwagon.